Okay. Hello, Law Juniors. Onward we stumble along this thorny, precipitous path. Um, we have a grading policy now. Good morning. Hope you're well. We have a grading policy now, and we have something like a schedule for the remainder of the school year. So I'm going to send that out as a communication, as a letter to students and parents later. I don't want to cloudy this so-called lesson with logistical stuff, but and I will communicate that information to everybody later today, and if you in the form of another letter, communication, email. And if you guys have questions, you can ask me. Let me know. All right. I did want to mention something about the grades specifically. Grading period 5, I turned in the grades. They're not grades, A's, B's, and C's. They are pass or not pass, or basically pass or incomplete. Pretty much everybody passed. But now what you see up on Synergy is grading period 6. So that's your rough draft paper, your final draft paper, self-reliance, the Emerson piece that we just went over last time, and which I've gotten from some of you. And then I'm going to put civil disobedience on there today, which we need to review as well. So check Synergy, see where you're at. Let me know if you have any questions or if you need to turn in work. Obviously, go for it. Don't bother with grading period 5. That's over. And again, in effect, everybody passed. Congratulations. I hope it was meaningful and fruitful and educational for you. So get on Synergy and just tune in. All right. I want to talk about Thoreau and civil disobedience today, but I also want to connect it back to Emerson. I want to try and provide some continuity here between these two most famous American transcendentalists. So I wanted to say a few words on Emerson by way of wrapping up and clearing up a few things that in dialogue with you guys, looking at your work and sending back comments and stuff, I thought it might be useful to bring up. And also try and connect all this stuff to the larger currents of the class. The class has a plan, and there's, related ideas, I like to think, that build on each other, but, see what you think ultimately. Okay. So Emerson and Thoreau, remember, you're dealing with the transcendentalist branch of Romanticism. Transcendentalism, an offshoot to transcend, to go beyond. And we're talking about, again, going beyond reason and science and logic, Christianity, and society in general. And remember, here's my visual for the day. Key romantic motifs that we're focusing on for Emerson and Thoreau, the transcendentalists: individualism, nonconformity, and rebellion. And hopefully you'll see, again, some continuity across these two amazing thinkers, Emerson and Thoreau. So here's your Emerson wrap up for what it's worth, and some broader connections to the class. Let me take my little sip here. All right. First of all, for Emerson, it's important to emphasize, and for Thoreau, nonconformity does not mean just reject everything society says. Don't just be like, nope, society said it. No, absolutely not. It's evil. Not going to do it. Right? That's not what Emerson is saying, because you're as mindless and stupid and a follower if you reject mechanically everything that society gives you. The game is to weigh the claim, just like we've been doing in Law Academy all year. What does society seem to say? What does tradition seem to say? You take that in and you weigh it in the scales of your own judgment, and you make the call, right? If you just become this contrarian anti-machine, that's equally mindless as being a mindless conformist. You're still defining yourself by society, ultimately. To really individuate yourself, you need to think about it for yourself. Society says I shouldn't murder people. So, fuck that, man. I'm going to go murder somebody. Well, obviously that's stupid, right? Weigh it in the scales of your own judgment, your own humanistic judgment. For Emerson and Thoreau, they trust people. They think we're fundamentally good, believe it or not. That babies are born good. And that, again, society is the poison. And it's the stuff that happens to you after you start growing up that might turn you toxic or evil or whatever you want to call it, right? But don't just be a mindless nonconformist. Don't just do it because, don't rebel against it because society says it necessarily. Show a little bit of discernment there, all right? I thought that was an important point. Otherwise, you're just as stupid as everybody else. Secondly, another beautiful thing about Emerson's spirituality, Thoreau more takes these ideas and practically, politically puts them into action. Emerson is more on the spiritual tip, right? But the most radical, subversive thing, look at what Emerson is saying. He says, you don't need an intermediary between you and God. You don't need a priest. You don't need an institution like a church. You can have a direct connection with God, right? If God is everywhere and part of you, you just need to tune into that natural wavelength. But again, it's not about the priest telling you what to think or interpreting something for you or saying, I am the way to God, my son or daughter, No, you can equally get there on your own. In fact, better under a tree than sitting in church, right? I mean, these ideas riled up Christianity in European history too. This notion of you don't need a priestly intermediary. Maybe it's just between you and God. What a radical concept, right? You take away the power of the institution and all other things, and it's this direct individual connection. It's one of the great spiritual things that Emerson offers to the world conversation. Lastly, what is Emerson and Thoreau? What are they really asking you to do? They're asking you to tune in to what we've been calling ideological hegemony. That's society's belief system. And to be a free thinker, right, you must swim in the water, but again, know the water's there and become conscious of it. And then you can evaluate what you want to embrace, what you want to reject, and attain some kind of mental or ideological freedom. So it turns out this class, I've been pushing Emerson all along in some form or other. You make the assessment, you figure out and learn about where these ideas come from that we're swimming around in, and then you become a more conscious person, right? So notice the water and think freely within that water. But remember, individuality and individualism, this cult of the individual in America, that's part of the water that you're swimming in too. So don't get too wrapped up in your own self and your own individuality. Again, that's part of the ideological foundation of American culture. And it can produce selfishness, consumerism, boneheaded conformity, all this other stuff. Or worse, we define ourselves by what we buy. Oh, I'm a Nike guy, or, whatever your look is or whatever, you become basically a commodified self. Your self is just a little bunch of what you buy in the marketplace. What a grim, pathetic vision of individuality, right? But this is what American consumerism has given us. Emerson would reject this. So remember, individualism is part of the water too, but you must be an individual and transcend the water in some way. Remember the lottery? Where that poor woman gets stoned to death? I mean, what would Emerson say about this? He would say, question tradition. Look at what's going on in this town. This is barbaric, right? The lottery was an attempt by Shirley Jackson to dislodge you from the water that you're swimming, or dislodge you from the ideas that you accept as natural. And look around and see that maybe they're awful, actually. Maybe horrible things are happening in the name of those ideas or beliefs, right? And we can change them. We're human beings. These aren't immutable things. Look at history. Look anywhere around you. There's so many different cultural beliefs, right? And ways to live your life. So in the end, we end back at the lottery with this Emerson Thoreau stuff. Okay. So Emerson, ladies and gentlemen, you got to love Ralph Waldo Emerson. But let's move on. Let's transition to Thoreau and this civil disobedience business. Thoreau, again, Emerson's greatest pupil. Was he a bit of an asshole? Yeah, apparently he was. Extremely arrogant, right? And pretty proud that he spent a couple days in jail for not paying the poll tax, as I said last time. But, he was privileged to even be able to do that. Let's put it into full context, all right? And, the government's not going to tell me what to do is a tiny bit self-indulgent, because if you're Black or a woman, you don't even have the chance to say that back in the time. I mean, Thoreau is standing on a necessary scaffold of privilege to even to be able to say these rather self-indulgent and self-congratulatory, I'm so rad, Emerson says, these self-congratulatory sorts of ideas. Okay. So, but you got to love Thoreau. As I said, he is an anarchist, which means he has fundamental faith in the goodness of human beings, that they don't need to be told what to do, and that fundamentally the government is a force of intimidation and oppression, that it suppresses the self, and as such, we need to rise against it. Emerson's not saying we shouldn't have a government, but really he sees a world where the government isn't necessary, and that every individual is given the respect of knowing right from wrong and doing their own thing, as long as it doesn't adversely affect somebody else, right? The political philosophy of anarchists and anarchism comes out of Romanticism, because it's this profound respect for the individual. You also see that with libertarianism in American culture. Libertarians, conservative Republicans, but they're like, no government. Government's like the mafia that comes in and tries to take our tax money away from us that we righteously earned, right? In fact, anarchists and libertarians both believe that the individual should not be sweated by the government, right? What's the difference? Well, the anarchists are way on the left. They don't like capitalism. Capitalism is the problem. Libertarians like capitalism. They say, hey, let capitalism just run everything. Let the market run everything, right? But you see both of these political philosophies on the right and the left, anti-government philosophies, coming out of Thoreau and Emerson. It's where these ideas come from, right? Again, why are people getting their guns and going to the state capitol steps and going, we want this coronavirus lockdown to end? You know, it comes out of this anti-government, I know what's right, you're trying to oppress me sort of thing. It's a fundamental part of American culture. You got to understand this strange beast, American culture. It's a part of you, whether or not you like it. Anyway, shut up, Wilcox. Civil disobedience is a series of brilliant arguments against government in general, right? And I respect them so much, I want to share them with you. So let me see if I can pull off the fancy maneuver of a screen share here. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. Let's do that, and then let's do that, and then that. Nope, that didn't work. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Okay, let's try this. So here we go. It's civil disobedience, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the term civil disobedience. You know what disobedience is. You're all teenagers. If you haven't disobeyed by this point, good God, you should do something about that. You disobey. You don't follow orders or rules, right? But what does the civil mean? You do it in a civil fashion. You don't bash somebody over the head. You don't take an axe and send it into their brain or anything like that, right? You peacefully resist, including being willing to go to jail, right? Whatever the price is, you're willing to pay that price in order not to have to obey an unjust law or an unfair government mandate of some kind. You're not going to let yourself be oppressed. All right, so let me just fly through this stuff. And first of all, standing government. What is Thoreau's argument against standing government? Well, let's look at the best type of government, the least oppressive, a democratic government. And you can put that in quotes if you want to, democratic. What's so bad about that? Well, Thoreau says once people are elected, they're in power, and that really they can do shady stuff and abuse their power and commit horrible acts and do things that are not in the public interest, right? Before the public can vote them out, or before the public can hold them accountable, or perhaps the government is secretive about it and they never even let the public know. Is this starting to sound familiar at all? We have a so-called democratic government, but again, how much stuff is really instituted from the top? All right. Thoreau talks about the Mexican War, so-called Polk's War, right? The US started a war in the mid 1800s with Mexico with naked imperialism and land grabbing as the ambition. Emerson and Thoreau and Mark Twain actually were some of the only people who are like, aren't we supposed to be like a democratic country that respects, you know, freedoms and stuff like that? Aren't we sort of like punking on Mexico here, right? The United States at war in any number of countries at any given time these days, and the public barely knows about it, right? There's even very little congressional oversight over when wars are started. We read some headlines in the paper about how bad a country is. Next thing, we're dropping bombs on them, right? So this is a big problem with standing government, even democratic government, all right? You can't vote them out before they've already done things that are either bad or evil or, again, against the public interest or against individual freedoms. And man, the examples are just everywhere around us. Majority rule. Hey, we always learn majority rule was great, right? Well, you know, it is. But have you ever heard of something called the tyranny of the minority? I mean, the tyranny of the majority. That's where let's say you take a vote and it's 49% to 51%. Well, who wins? 51%, obviously, but that's 49% of the people whose interests are not represented in that decision. And if it's that big a part of the population, you could argue something like this term tyranny of the majority, that the majority dominates and rules over in an unfair fashion minority groups, right? And again, look at US history. It's rife with this sort of stuff, right? Majority rule. Thoreau's greatest argument, I think, is the majority is not more right. They're only stronger. Sometimes they happen to be right, But the majority of people in the United States used to believe in slavery. There used to be a law and people thought it was fine, right? So majority rule, the majority is stronger, not more just or more right. That's a devastating argument against the notion of a democratic government, that they don't represent the right just because they represent the will of the majority. If everybody's a mindless conformist and stupid, they can be manipulated also. So the majority often does not discern or even understand the issues, right? So who's right? Well, the wise individual, says Thoreau. And remember, for Thoreau and Emerson, morality lives in here. Ethics lives in here, not in systems, not in groups. People behave differently in groups. They're willing to bury their own conscience, their own moral beliefs for convenience, right? And we already talked about this with self-reliance. So these are some of the problems with majority rule. They're realistic philosophical arguments against democratic government, and we need to understand them. We need to always be critical of everything in the water around us. The law in general, laws are writings on a piece of paper, and sometimes they say everything's great when it isn't, right? Black people gained rights, according to the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. But those rights were not enforced by the government. So on paper, they were there, but they were not affected in real life and real society. And during Reconstruction in the South, as you know, the North said, well, we're not going to send troops down there to enforce these new freedoms for Black people. And you get the rise of the KKK and all these other organizations that intimidate Black people so they can't vote, they can't participate in daily life. And so they have equality on paper. But here we are in 2020, and we still do not have actual equal rights for everybody, every racial group, every gender group, every sexual orientation group, and all that stuff, as well you guys know. Thoreau's best argument against the law in general is it never made men a whit more just, is what he says. The laws do not make you better. The laws don't make you more moral, right? In fact, the ultimate threat is force. If you don't do it, the state is going to force you to do something. And that is the ultimate abridgment of individual rights in some fundamental way. So the laws do not make us moral. What makes us moral is our own nature and the way that we came off the hand of God, right? I mean, for Emerson and Thoreau, the kid is innocent, the baby's innocent. And when you're sitting there in the sandbox playing with the other kids, sometimes people bat each other over the head and stuff, but for the romantics and the transcendentalists, we are fundamentally good beings. We know right from wrong. It's when school and church get involved that they muddy the water of what's right and wrong, and it becomes more complicated, right? Kids are not born racist. They learn that stuff, and we talked about this. So the law does not make you more moral. Morality comes in here. You don't need some code of laws, right, to make us moral. Serving the state, this is a great bit. Most people serve the state. Everybody serves the state basically with their bodies, right? Soldiers, cops, they don't do it with their consciences. They are there to execute the law. And the law, for a transcendentalist, is an artificial construct, right? It's supposed to be a reified list of natural moral things, but we know that it's not that simple. It's more complicated than that. And some laws have been extremely unjust and have weighed down on all sorts of minority groups. Serving the state, why can't we serve the state with our consciences? Why must we only be reduced to wood or stones? That's what Thoreau says. If you're not using your conscience and your mind, if you're just following orders with your body, you're a waste of protoplasm and brain matter, right? You're this remarkable being off the hand of nature, and you're just going to mindlessly serve an artificial construct like the state or some artificial power system, right? What a disservice to all that you are and all that you are connected to, because you're holding it down for the whole cosmos. So serving the state, Thoreau doesn't like it. And he goes and talks crap about the tax man. This is what libertarians really can't stand. You're going to tax me, right? The government's a thief, right? And that's that more right-wing variety of this hyper-individualism. But unjust laws exist, Thoreau says. What should we do about it? Well, you should not just go, well, let's just wait until the next ballot, or let's wait till the next election and try and convince enough people to get rid of that law. Well, let's do it that way. Thoreau says, no way, man. It's going to take too long. You should not ever be made the agent of injustice. If you believe in basic human rights and Donald Trump wants to send you down to the border and make you put immigrants in cages, right? That is a fucked up law. Okay. It's unjust. So we're not going to wait and see if Trump gets elected out of power. We are going to go and protest or get arrested or put our bodies on the line again in some fundamental way to stop that. Don't wait around. You got to act now. The way that laws change anyway, and the way that politicians respond is by pressure from below anyway, real democratic pressure. Otherwise, the politicians are going to do what they've been paid to do, or they're going to serve the interests of the people who largely funded their election to power. And I'm starting to wonder whether street demonstrations are. Anyway, let's not go there. Democracy is still great and can still work against oppressive governments. So unjust laws, don't wait around for them to change, right? Think about it that way. Okay, let's go down to this. Discuss the society machine metaphor in lines 100 to 113. Under what conditions should the law be broken? How far should one go? If you'll indulge me, I'm just going to read this paragraph. This is Thoreau at his best. If the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go, let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out. If the injustice has a spring or a pulley or a rope or a crank exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether the remedy will not be worse than the evil. But if it is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Let your life be a counter friction to stop the machine. What I have to do is to see, at any rate, that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn. Okay? So society is a machine. It's going to try and program you. Don't let it. Don't let it. But we're social creatures. We live in societies. Is it a necessary evil living in society and in this machine? Maybe so. If there's one thing off, a little pulley or a crank in this machine that's kind of not quite working or slaps the side of the machine a little bit, just let it go, man. Right? That'll work itself out, or it'll get shaved off, or it'll wear off of the machine. But if it is a big thing that's slapping a lot of people as it goes around, or it's a major, major problem, he says, throw your body on the machine, right? What does he mean by that? Well, again, get your body directly involved, clog the jails, you and the people who agree with you, right? Protest, be out there and actively engage. How far should you go? You should go all the way. You should be willing to practically sacrifice your body, right? But you're not going to do it by hitting people upside the head. So you can see Martin Luther King and Gandhi both adopted this ideology with varying degrees of success. We could argue about how successful they were, right? Martin Luther King was assassinated by violence. Does that mean that he's a sucker for not employing violence? No, Martin Luther King has some of the most eloquent defenses of nonviolence that you're going to find anywhere. All right. So remember, for the Romantics and Transcendentalists, society is always an artificial thing. It's a machine. Just like the Enlightenment thinkers saw the universe as a machine, and the Romantics said no, right? Romantics understand that the government is a machine. Society is a machine. And don't let it program you. Don't let it run you. Okay. And you guys' answers have been great to this question that I've gotten from you guys. Paradox is an apparent contradiction that is still somehow true, right? Thoreau has a great one somewhere else. He says, I am not as wise as the day I was born. I am not as wise as the day I was born. That's a contradiction. Babies don't know anything. How could they be wise? Well, again, if you know Thoreau and Emerson, this quote makes sense, right? I was wisest, purest, holiest, most divine, most sacred, most godlike the day I was born. And as society and its machine programming got more and more into me, I became less wise. I became further detached from the truth of God or nature, or how the Romantics are. Okay. But it's good stuff. I mean, it's powerful, powerful thinking. All right. So Thoreau likes the paradox. He busts a couple in this piece. We're down here now. Don't worry, we're almost done. Lines 142 to 7. Just this is an aphorism that's just great, right? In a society that unjustly imprisons anybody, the only proper place for the just man is in prison. In a society that unjustly imprisons people, the only fair and just place for a good, free, true man or woman is jail, right? Again, a contradiction. The good people should be in jail. That's what he's saying, all right? And then in the second paradox, this one right here, Thoreau's talking about when he got thrown in jail. and he is in the cell feeling pretty good about himself. And he says, basically, you know, I'm more free than my fellow townspeople. Those people's minds are still locked in the machine logic of society. I have transcended it. They can lock my body away. They can do whatever they want to my body, but they'll never, ever get in here. They'll never, ever compromise my personal integrity, the integrity of my own mind, my own soul, my quote, nature, right? So the paradox there, Thoreau's sitting in his cell going, I am more free than those other fools out there. They haven't figured it out yet. All right. Quote and discuss the last sentence. It ends with a very Emersonian note, perhaps you noticed, right? If a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies, and so a man. Well, again, man's nature for Thoreau is that true self in there somewhere, right? Under the heaped up garbage and nonsense that society has confused you with. You've been bamboozled to some extent, right? So man's nature is sacred. It's holy. You must discover your true self and be true to it. And you can't let society get to you. All right? So civil disobedience, ladies and gentlemen. Is it better to change the world through violence, or is it better to change the world through something like civil disobedience and reform? This is one of the big questions in the civil rights movement. For example, let me get off the screen here. Uh-oh. Stop share, man. Okay. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. In the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King represented this end of nonviolence. We're going to march. We're going to protest. We're going to give eloquent speeches using reason, but emotion also in argument form to try and bring about racial equality, the long delayed dream of racial equality. Malcolm X said, if you come at me with a gun, I'm going to defend myself with a gun. I'm not about to get my head cracked, right? For Malcolm X, the problem for Black people had been their unwillingness, actually, to stand up and fight back, dangerous as it was, right? So what is the answer? I mean, it's your call, right? Use your own individuated, highly free-thinking self to try and tackle some of these problems. All right, so where does individualism come from in American culture? Lots of places, but these transcendentalists, Emerson and Thoreau, are some of the heavy hitters. And I'm not going to give you guys any homework between now and Thursday. Why don't you guys check into Friday is the next class. Why don't you guys check into Synergy and just see where your grade's at. As you know, the semester is credit or no credit. And as I said, I'll send out a communication later today about what that means for my classes and the schedule for the remainder of the year and how we're going to try and close this year out as gracefully as possible. I'm not going to have you guys read Huck Finn, the novel. If you want to read one of the great novels that deals with all these ideas that we've been talking about in romanticism and transcendentalism and a bunch of other stuff, man, do yourself a favor. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, but I think it's ridiculous for me to formally assign it. I will find other hopefully interesting tidbits for you to fill out the remaining really 2.5 weeks and then finals week. All right. Hope you guys are well. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to continue grading the stuff that I get, returning it to you, and putting it on Synergy. That's the game we're playing. Anyway, take care, you guys, and I will check in with you again on Friday.